What I have here are some Riley springs that I'm going to use on my Brooklands replica. These will be some kind of Riley saloon springs, and I need to get these modified. So the biggest problem with them is the number of leaves and the what's called the free camber, which is the sort of height in here, the bend in the springs. So on a Brooklands, you need the springs to be flat when the car is loaded. So the leaf spring is basically straight across there. And to do this, you need to set up the springs so that when unloaded, they have the right setting. And there are calculations you can do to help work all of that out based on the width of the steel in the spring and the thickness of the steel, the number of leaves, and so on. So I've created a little spreadsheet that I use to figure that out. And somebody had really helpfully sent me a set of these calculations for a MPH replica. And I was able to have a look at those and see how they'd done it, and then redo those calculations for my car. One of the things that's important is the length of the spring. Now, this gets a little bit tricky. So when you look at a spring like this, there are two ways to measure it. You can get the length directly from eye to eye, but what's more important in my case, and I think the more correct way to do it, is the actual length of the steel along the curve. So that'll give you the length of the spring when it's flat. And since the Brooklands is flat, and I know that the shackles need to be vertical when the spring is flat, I can measure the length from this eye directly across to here to know what the measurement should be. And it's 20.5 inches, I believe, off the top of my head. So to figure out what these springs are, and these springs are actually the correct length, I used a piece of string and sort of held that along the leaf spring and then measured the string to figure out what the lengths were. So these springs are actually the correct length already. It's just the camber that's wrong. Now, these are Riley saloon springs, so they're not actually exactly right for a Brooklands. The Brooklands had special springs, and I've got a picture of one here, and you can see that it's got this, the top leaf actually has these sort of ears on it, and that's what bolts the clamps that hold the spring together. So instead of these, it's kind of a special top leaf, a special shape. Being original Brooklands, these are impossible to get, unless you've got an original Brooklands, obviously. And there aren't too many of those around. So these will have to do. What I'm going to do is have these sent down to a spring maker in Dunedin who can remove the leaves for me and reset the camber. The rear springs are going to be a little bit trickier because the two that I've got have got different thickness top leaves, and I think the easiest thing to do there is just have each top leaf remade so that they're the same. The rest of the spring should be the same. This one needs 2 leaves taken out of it, and the front one needs 1. The other modification they'll have to do is, you can see here how the second leaf is wrapping around the spring eye. I need that removed because with that on there, there's too much width and it won't fit into the shackle here. It's just too big, and it won't fit into the front mount either. So I'll have them do that at the same time. So this is the front axle and one of the front springs. These actually have numbers on them, and these are Riley part numbers, so I should be able to look this up, figure out exactly what the spring is off. The rears also have numbers, but it's a little bit harder to read. But the way the springs work is, this is the front axle, this is one of the shock mounting brackets, and that seems to go underneath the spring, and then the spring fits on top of it like that, and there are square U-bolts that go through to bolt it to the axle. So that's how that sits on there. This is the spreadsheet I made to figure out the spring settings I mainly did this just so I could play around with different numbers and see how much difference it actually made to the camber based on things like the weight of the car, or the number of leaves, that kind of thing. Just out of interest. One, I needed to get the right values, and two, I just wanted to see how much actual difference the weight in the car makes to how much camber you need. And it isn't a huge difference. This is in inches here. You have to also take into account that the spring makers add in extra camber to allow for the springs to settle once they actually make them. It all sounds like it's not a 100% exact science, the way they put together these springs. They have warned me that there may be a little bit of backwards and forwards needed to get them exactly right. I'm hoping that's not the case because I'm in Wellington and they're in Dunedin, so it's not cheap sending springs backwards and forwards. But I'm pretty sure these numbers will get me fairly close to what it should be. I was very lucky that somebody in Portugal actually posted me this set of calculations for a MPH Works racing replica, and these are the calculations they used for those springs. So the calculations here worked out to be very similar to the ones I did here. There are two formulas involved, and these formulas actually came from my copy of the Machinery's Handbook. I think this one's from the 60s. So this is a massive book that has every sort of mechanical engineering formula you could possibly ever want. And it has a section here on elliptical leaf springs, and these are the formulas that they actually used in the set of calculations here. So I just reused the same sort of calculations but with my specs put in there, and using these formulas, you basically plug in a whole bunch of values and it spits some numbers out. And those are the numbers that I've given to the spring maker, who will hopefully get the springs sorted out for me soon.